Imagine losing $10,000 in a single night during what was supposed to be your dream trip. Today, I'm going to tell you the devastating story of Michael, a 40-year-old American who fell for one of the cruelest scams I've ever witnessed in Rio de Janeiro. What began as an innocent search for companionship turned into the worst nightmare of his life. Stay until the end, because I'll reveal every shocking detail of how this scam unfolded, and more importantly, how you can protect yourself so you never have to go through it again. Before we begin, if you're planning a trip to Brazil, or simply want to learn about these real-life stories happening around the world, like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and leave a comment letting us know if you've ever experienced any strange travel situations. Don't leave the video, because the ending of this story is absolutely surprising and could save you from falling into a similar trap. Michael had always dreamed of visiting Brazil. Working as a tech entrepreneur in a small town in the American countryside, he spent his days immersed in spreadsheets, meetings, and business strategies. At 40, single and financially successful, he decided it was time to fulfill a long-held dream: to visit the land of soccer, paradisiacal beaches, and the infectious joy he'd always seen in movies. The idea of traveling alone to Rio de Janeiro didn't scare him. In fact, he saw it as an opportunity for self-discovery and adventure. Michael had researched the city extensively, read travel guides, watched documentaries, and even started learning some basic Portuguese. He wanted an authentic experience, not just be limited to luxury hotels and obvious tourist attractions. When he finally stepped foot into Tom Jobim Airport on a sunny March afternoon, Michael felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The humid heat of Rio hit him as soon as he stepped out of the airport, and he immediately noticed how different everything was from the dry, cold climate of his hometown. The vibrant colors, the sounds of Portuguese being spoken around him, the constant movement of people, it all contributed to a feeling of being truly in another world. He had booked a hotel in Copacabana, a strategic choice that would allow easy access to the famous beaches and main tourist attractions. During the first few days, Michael religiously followed his planned itinerary, visiting Christ the Redeemer, walking along the Copacabana and Ipanema waterfront, sampling local cuisine, and making an effort to interact with the locals using his limited Portuguese. But something was bothering him. Despite the city's stunning beauty and the genuine hospitality he encountered, Michael felt isolated. He watched groups of friends laughing on the beaches, couples walking hand in hand along the shore, families enjoying the weekend together, and realized that his experience, though culturally rich, was quite lonely. It was then, one quiet night in his hotel room, while reviewing the day's photos and planning the next day's activities, that Michael had an idea that would completely change the course of his trip. He looked at his phone and thought, why not try meeting a local? Someone who could show Rio from a different, more intimate and authentic perspective. Michael wasn't new to dating apps. In the United States, he'd used some platforms occasionally, always with some caution, but he'd never considered using them while traveling internationally. The idea of meeting a local through an app seemed like a natural way to break down the cultural and language barriers he was facing. After a few minutes of reflection, he decided to download the most popular app he knew, Tinder. He carefully configured his profile, choosing photos that showed him smiling at American landmarks, including a brief description in English mentioning that he was a visitor to Rio and interested in learning about the local culture. He didn't lie about anything: age, profession, reason for the trip. Everything was there, honest and straightforward. The first matches came quickly, which didn't surprise him much. Michael knew that being an American visiting Brazil might spark curiosity, and he was prepared for basic conversations about cultural differences and recommendations for places to visit. What he didn't expect was to find someone who seemed genuinely interested not only in his nationality, but in him as a person. Isabella appeared in his match list on a Thursday morning. Her profile picture showed a brunette woman of about 28, smiling naturally on a beach Michael recognized as Ipanema. She wore a simple but elegant white dress, and there was something in her gaze that conveyed both confidence and sweetness. Her profile was discreet, with only 3 photos and a brief description. Karaoke passionate about life, always looking for good conversations and new experiences. The match was instant, and to Michael's surprise, Isabella was the first to message. "Hi, Michael. I saw you're visiting our wonderful city. How's your experience been so far?" The message was in Portuguese, but Michael used the app's translator to understand and respond. "Hello, Isabella. Rio is amazing, but I confess it's been a more solitary experience than I imagined. I'm trying to get to know the city in a more authentic way," he replied, also in Portuguese with the help of a translator. "I'm so sorry you're feeling lonely. Rio is a city that becomes much more special when you have someone to share your experiences with. Have you been to Lapa? It's a place that tourists don't usually know much about, but it's where the true karaoke soul reveals itself," she replied almost immediately. The conversation flowed surprisingly naturally. Isabella demonstrated knowledge not only about tourist attractions, but also about deeper cultural aspects of Rio. She told him about small hidden restaurants where he could try real Brazilian food, about cultural events taking place off the beaten path, and about the history of the neighborhoods he was visiting. Michael was impressed by her level of English. Isabella alternated between Portuguese and English in her messages, explaining that she had studied in the United States for a period and had always been fascinated by American culture. She asked intelligent questions about his work, the city where he lived, and his impressions of Brazil compared to what he had imagined before the trip. For 2 days, they exchanged messages constantly. Michael would wake up eager to see if there were any new messages from her, and Isabella always responded quickly, keeping the conversation interesting and engaging. She shared details about her life. She worked in digital marketing, lived alone in an apartment in Ipanema, loved cinema and literature, and had a special passion for Brazilian music and American jazz. What impressed Michael most was how genuinely interested Isabella seemed in getting to know him better. She didn't ask the typical superficial questions he expected: where he was staying, how long he would be in town, how much money he had. Instead, she inquired about his dreams, his fears, his motivations for traveling alone, his impressions of the cultural differences he was observing. "You know, Michael, I've always believed that the best connections happen when 2 people allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other," she wrote in one of their most profound conversations. "You seem like someone with many interesting layers, and I'd love to learn more about who you really are, beyond the successful businessman visiting Rio." These words touched Michael in a way he hadn't expected. He hadn't had such meaningful conversations with anyone in years. His life in the United States, despite his professional success, had become a predictable routine of work, superficial social events, and casual relationships that never developed into anything deeper. Isabella seemed to offer something he didn't even know he was looking for: a genuine human connection. That's when she suggested the meeting. "Michael, I know this may seem hasty, but how about we meet in person? I know a place in Lapa that's absolutely magical at night. It's a small bar, mostly frequented by locals, where you can experience authentic live music and get a feel for what it's like to truly be part of Rio's nightlife. What do you think?" Michael hesitated for a moment. Part of him felt cautious about meeting a stranger in a city he was still exploring. But the larger part, the one that had felt increasingly connected to Isabella through their conversations, saw this as the perfect opportunity to make their trip truly special. Now, before I continue with what happened in that fateful encounter, I need to take an important break from the story. If you're enjoying this content and want access to comprehensive information on all the types of scams tourists face in Brazil, I've created an exclusive resource called Brazil Unlocked. This ebook contains details on dozens of different scams, tactics criminals use, warning signs to look out for, and practical protection strategies. You can download it by visiting the link in this video's description or in the first pinned comment. It's a resource that could literally save your trip and your money. Michael agreed to the meeting without much hesitation. Isabella had completely earned his trust through those intense conversations, and the prospect of finally meeting someone in person who seemed to understand Both the local culture and his own interests was too exciting to resist. They arranged to meet on a Friday night at 9 o'clock in front of a subway station in Lapa. Isabella explained that it would be easier for him to get there by public transportation and that the bar was just a few minutes' walk away. "You'll recognize the place by the music playing there," she said, "and I'll be wearing a blue dress and a black leather jacket. I can't wait to meet you in person." Michael spent Friday in a state of anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. He visited Sugarloaf Mountain in the morning, trying to maintain his normal tourist routine, but his mind was constantly focused on the evening's date. He found himself carefully choosing his outfit, wanting to make a good impression without seeming like he was trying too hard. Over lunch, he reread some of the messages he'd exchanged with Isabella, smiling as he recalled some particularly funny or touching conversations they'd had. There was something about her writing that conveyed warmth and intelligence, a combination he found irresistible. As the afternoon wore on, Michael began to feel the butterflies typical of a first date, but there was also a sense of positive anticipation. He had told a few friends in the United States about Isabella via text, and they had all responded enthusiastically, saying he seemed more excited and happy than he had in months. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Michael showered, dressed in a light blue dress shirt and dark jeans, elegant yet casual, and left the hotel for the subway. He had carefully studied the route and knew exactly how to get to the station where he would meet Isabella. The Rio subway was an interesting experience for him. Unlike the public transportation systems he had experienced in the United States, there was a vibrant energy there, with people of all ages and social classes sharing the same space. Musicians played in the cars, vendors offered various wares, and there was a general sense of movement and life that he found fascinating. When he arrived at the designated station in Lapa, Michael immediately felt the difference in atmosphere. The area was busier and more bohemian than the areas where he had spent most of his stay. There were bars with loud music, people chatting animatedly in the street. A nighttime energy that was both exciting and a little intimidating for someone unfamiliar. He looked around for a woman in a blue dress and black leather jacket, but saw no one fitting the description. He checked the time on his phone. It was exactly 9 o'clock, so he was on time. He decided to text Isabella. "Hi, I'm here at the station. Are you here yet?" The reply came quickly. "Hi, love. I'm just a few minutes late. Don't worry, I'm almost there." The use of the word love made him smile. He'd noticed that Brazilians seemed to use terms of endearment more frequently and naturally than Americans, and this added a special charm to their interactions. Michael leaned against the station exit, observing the hustle and bustle around him and trying to control his anxiety. He felt a bit exposed, obviously a foreigner in an area not often frequented by tourists. But he remembered Isabella's words about wanting an authentic Rio experience. 10, 15, 20 minutes passed, and there was still no sign of Isabella. Michael began to feel slightly worried, but he tried to remain calm. Delays were common in Brazil. He'd read that in several travel guides, and Isabella had already warned him that she would arrive a few minutes later than scheduled. At 9:30, he sent another message. "Hi, Isabella. I'm still waiting here. Is everything okay? Do you need any directions?" This time, the reply took a little longer, but eventually arrived. "Michael, sorry I'm late. I had a traffic jam, but I'm already pretty close. Actually, I changed my mind about the location. How about we meet directly at the bar? It's just 2 blocks from the station, towards Rua dos Arcos. You'll see a red sign that says Samba and Soul. I'll see you there." Michael felt a slight unease at the change of plans, but decided it wasn't a big deal. He left the station and began walking in the indicated direction, using his phone's GPS for guidance. The area was quite busy, with many people on the streets, and he felt reasonably safe walking the short distance. Finding the bar was harder than he expected. After walking for a few blocks and not spotting any sign for Samba and Soul, Michael began to feel genuinely lost and a little anxious. He sent Isabella another message. "Hi, I'm looking for the bar, but I can't find it. Can you give me more details about its location?" This time, the answer took almost 15 minutes. "Oh, Michael, what a mess. Actually, the bar recently changed its name. Now it's just called Soul. It's on a small side street, so it might be hard to find. How about you stay where you are and I'll come to you? Tell me exactly where you are." At this point, Michael began to sense something wasn't quite right. The delays, the changes of plans, the difficulty finding her, it was all beginning to form a pattern that made him uneasy. But he tried to rationalize. Maybe Isabella was just disorganized, or maybe these things were normal in the local culture. He didn't want to judge too quickly. That's when he heard someone calling his name. "Michael! Are you Michael?" He turned and saw two men approaching. One was tall and thin, wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt, while the other was shorter and stockier, wearing a dress shirt and slacks. Both looked to be between 25 and 30 years old. "Yes, it's me," Michael replied, automatically speaking in English before correcting himself. "Yes, I'm Michael." "Nice to meet you, man," said the taller man, speaking English with a Brazilian accent, but quite fluent. "Isabella sent us to pick you up. She had a last-minute problem and couldn't make it, but she asked us to take you to her. We're her friends, Carlos and Fernando." Michael felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. On the one hand, there was finally an explanation for all the confusion and delays. On the other, he was genuinely looking forward to meeting Isabella in person, and the prospect of yet another postponement was frustrating. "Where is she?" Michael asked, trying to assess the situation. "She's in another bar not far from here," Fernando, the shorter one, replied. "Actually, it's an even better place, more private. She said you two would enjoy it there more for a calm conversation. Come with us. It's only a 5-minute walk." Something in the back of Michael's mind was sending him warning signals, but he couldn't quite pinpoint what. The two men seemed friendly and spoke about Isabella in a way that suggested they actually knew her. They mentioned details about her personality that were consistent with conversations Michael had had with her. "Have you ever experienced a situation while traveling where you felt something wasn't right, but couldn't quite pinpoint what it was? Leave a comment sharing your experience, and don't forget to like this video if you've followed this story thus far." "Okay," Michael said finally. "Let's go to her then." The three began walking together through the streets of Lapa. Carlos and Fernando maintained a seemingly casual conversation, asking about Michael's trip, how long he had been in Rio, and what he thought of the city. They seemed genuinely interested in his answers and made comments that demonstrated their knowledge of American culture. "Isabella talked a lot about you," Carlos said as they walked. "She said you two had really interesting conversations about cultural differences. She's really excited to meet you in person. She's a truly special person," Fernando added. "We've known her for years, and we rarely see her as interested in someone as she is in you. You're in luck, man." These words made Michael feel a little better about the whole situation. Perhaps he was being overly paranoid. After all, being in a foreign country, in an unfamiliar area, at night naturally made anyone more alert. But these men seemed to be exactly what they said they were. Friends of Isabella trying to help in an unexpected situation. They walked for about 10 minutes, turning into increasingly narrow and less crowded streets. Michael began to notice fewer and fewer people around, and the streetlights were becoming more dim. The music and activity from Lapa's main bars grew more distant and muffled. "Is it much further?" Michael asked, starting to feel genuinely uncomfortable with the direction they were taking. "No, man, we're almost there," Carlos replied. "The bar is on a quieter street. Isabella chose it for that very reason. She said you'd want a more private setting to talk without too much noise around you." They turned a corner and entered a street that was practically deserted. Michael saw no other businesses open, just a few old houses with shutters and very dim streetlights. His instinct for self-preservation finally began to scream, warnings impossible to ignore. "Guys, I'm not comfortable with this," Michael said, stopping in his tracks. "I think I'd better go back and see Isabella some other time." It was at that moment that the whole charade fell apart. Carlos and Fernando also stopped and positioned themselves to block Michael's return path. The friendly expression on their faces completely changed, replaced by something much colder and more intimidating. "Actually, Michael," Fernando said, pulling an object from his pocket that Michael couldn't quite identify in the dark, but which clearly wasn't something good. "You're not going anywhere now. And Isabella? Well, Isabella doesn't exist. I'm the one who's been talking to you all these days. Michael's world crumbled in that instant. All the emotional connection he'd felt, all the deep conversations, all the anticipation and expectation, it had all been an elaborate lie to bring him exactly here, alone, vulnerable, and with no one knowing where he was. "What do you want?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the panic that was beginning to take hold of him. "We want you to cooperate with us," Carlos said, stepping closer. "You'll do exactly what we tell you. And if you do everything right, you'll come out of this with only a financial loss. Try something stupid, and the situation will get much more complicated for you." Michael realized he was in a desperate situation. He was on a secluded street in a foreign city, with no one knowing his exact location, being threatened by two men who clearly knew far more about him than he knew about them. Every piece of information he had shared with Isabella during their conversations, where he was staying, how long he would be in the city, the fact that he was traveling alone, had all been used against him. "First," Fernando said, "you're going to unlock your phone and hand it over to me." Michael hesitated for a moment, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. He unlocked the phone and handed it over. Fernando began browsing through Michael's banking apps, clearly knowing exactly what he was looking for. "Great. You have an account with the digital bank. That will make things easier. What's the password for your banking app?" "I'm not giving that to you," Michael said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Carlos stepped even closer, and Michael could see there were other objects in his jacket pockets. "Michael, let me explain something to you. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way, you cooperate, we do what needs to be done, and you leave here in a few hours only poorer. The hard way, well, you don't want to know the hard way." The threat was clear, and Michael realized he had no real choice. With trembling hands, he provided the password for his banking app. Fernando immediately began browsing his account, checking balances and transfer options. "Very good, you have a nice balance here," Fernando commented casually as if chatting about the weather. "Now, let's make some transfers. We'll go to different accounts, small amounts each, so as not to raise immediate suspicions in the bank's system." Over the next 2 hours, Michael was forced to watch as his bank account was systematically emptied. The criminals clearly knew what they were doing. They transferred varying amounts to multiple accounts, always keeping each transaction below thresholds that could trigger automatic security alerts. But that was just the beginning. After draining his checking account, they began targeting his credit cards. They forced Michael to provide passwords and security codes, and then began making online purchases of items that could be quickly resold: electronics, luxury goods, gift cards. For more information on how these scams work and how to fully protect yourself, be sure to check out the Brazil Unlocked ebook I prepared. The link is in the video description and in the first pinned comment. It's comprehensive material that can literally save you from situations like this. The most disturbing aspect of the entire experience for Michael was not only the financial loss, but the psychological violation. For days, he had developed genuine feelings for a person who didn't exist. The conversations he had considered deep and meaningful had been calculated manipulations, designed specifically to identify his vulnerabilities and lead him into this situation. "How did you know so much about me?" Michael asked at some point during the ordeal, genuinely curious about the mechanics of the coup despite the desperate situation he found himself in. Fernando gave a dark laugh. "Michael, you've told us everything about yourself. Lonely? Financially successful? Traveling alone? Seeking authentic human connection? You practically painted a target on your own back. We just had to create the person you most wanted to meet." "And Isabella?" Michael asked. "Isabella was me," Carlos replied. "I spent hours researching American culture, your hometown, and topics a tech entrepreneur would find interesting. I created a persona that would be irresistible to someone just like you." The sophistication of the scam was disturbingly impressive. It wasn't just a simple robbery, but a complex psychological operation that exploited deep emotional needs to create vulnerability. Michael realized he had been studied and manipulated in far more detail than he could have ever imagined. After nearly 3 hours, The criminals finally seemed satisfied with the amount they had managed to extract. They had transferred money from their bank accounts, maxed out their credit cards, and made online purchases totaling approximately $10,000. "Very well, Michael," Fernando said, handing him back the phone. "It was a pleasure doing business with you. Now let's be clear about how this will work from now on." Carlos took control of the final conversation. "You won't talk to anyone about this for the next 24 hours. You won't go to the police, you won't go to the American consulate, you won't post anything on social media. We have all your information. We know where you're staying. We know when your return flight is. We know much more about you than you realize. If you try anything before you're on the plane back home," Fernando added, "the situation will get much more complicated for you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Michael nodded, fully understanding the implied threat. He was completely at their mercy, in unfamiliar territory, with no resources and no local allies. "Now you will walk back to the main street and take a taxi to your hotel," Carlos said. "You will act as if nothing happened. And remember, 24 hours of total silence." They left him there, alone on the dark street, cell phone in hand, and a sense of violation that went far beyond financial loss. Michael began walking in the direction he believed to be the exit from that maze of narrow streets, trying to process what had just happened to him. The walk back to the bustling Lapa area seemed to take forever. Michael felt simultaneously numb and hyper-alert, every sound making him jump, every person passing by a potential threat. When he finally reached a busy street and managed to flag down a taxi, he felt as if he were emerging from a nightmare. During the drive back to Copacabana, Michael remained silent, staring out the window without really seeing the passing landscape. The driver tried to make conversation a few times, commenting on how beautiful the night was and asking where he was from, but Michael responded only in monosyllables. When he arrived at the hotel, Michael went straight up to his room without speaking to anyone at the front desk. He locked the door, checked that all the windows were closed, and sat on the bed, trying to begin to process what had happened. The first thing he did was check his bank accounts on his phone. The reality of the numbers confirmed his worst fears. His checking account was practically empty, his credit cards were maxed out, and there were dozens of unauthorized transactions. Michael sat there for hours, navigating feelings of anger, shame, fear, and profound sadness. The anger was obviously directed at the criminals, but also at himself for having been so naive. The shame stemmed from the realization of how easily he had been emotionally manipulated. The fear was about the threats they had made and about his safety during his remaining days in Rio. And the sadness was perhaps the most complex emotion. Mourning for the connection he thought he had found with Isabella, for the lost innocence, for the broken trust. He tried to sleep, but sleep just wouldn't come. Every noise in the hotel hallway made him alert. Every notification on his phone made him jump. Michael had completely lost the sense of security we take for granted so much of the time. For the next 24 hours, Michael followed his instructions exactly. He didn't contact anyone about the incident. He tried to maintain a normal appearance, leaving the hotel to eat, visiting a few nearby sites, but everything seemed colorless and lifeless. The city that had seemed vibrant and welcoming just days before now felt threatening and hostile. Michael realized how his perspective on everything had radically changed. Every person who approached him on the street was a potential threat. Every invitation to try a restaurant, every offer of help with directions, every friendly smile was viewed with suspicion. Paranoia had set in a way he had never experienced before. But perhaps the hardest part to process was the feeling of having been completely deceived on an emotional level. Michael kept receiving Tinder notifications, and every time he saw the app icon, he felt a mixture of nausea and anger. He had opened his heart to someone who didn't exist, had developed real feelings for a persona carefully constructed to exploit him. The next morning, after completing the 24 hours of silence they had demanded, Michael finally summoned the courage to contact his bank in the United States. The call was a humiliating experience, having to explain to an agent how he had been deceived and robbed. The agent was professional, but Michael could sense a subtle judgmental tone. How had a seasoned businessman of 40 years fallen for such an obvious scam? The bank said they could try to dispute some of the transactions, but the process would be lengthy, and there was no guarantee of recovery, especially for transfers Michael had authorized under duress. Credit card purchases had a slightly better chance of being reversed, but it would still be a complex process. Michael also contacted the American consulate in Rio, more to report the incident than to expect concrete help. The consular officer was friendly but direct. Cases like this were more common than Michael imagined, and the chances of recovering the money or identifying the criminals were very limited. Unfortunately, the official said, this type of scam has become increasingly sophisticated. Criminals study social media profiles, create convincing personas, and exploit victims' emotional needs. It's not a matter of intelligence or life experience. Anyone can be a target. These words offered Michael some small comfort, but they didn't completely alleviate the feeling of having been an idiot. For the remaining 3 days of his trip, he remained mostly at the hotel, leaving only when necessary and always keeping to busy, touristy areas. The trip that should have been a transformative adventure had become a nightmare that Michael knew would affect him for a long time. He canceled all the excursions he had planned for the last few days, no longer able to feel pleasure or curiosity about anything related to the city. When the day of his departure finally arrived, Michael felt simultaneously relieved and defeated. Relieved to finally be leaving a situation that had left him constantly anxious, but defeated because the criminals had managed not only to steal his money, but also to completely destroy his ability to enjoy an experience he had long anticipated. On the plane home, Michael began to reflect on the entire experience more analytically. He realized there were several red flags he'd overlooked throughout the process. Isabella's reluctance to video call, citing connection issues, her insistence on meeting at specific times and places, the amount of personal information she'd managed to extract from him without sharing much about herself. More importantly, Michael began to understand how his own loneliness and desire for connection had been systematically exploited. The scammers clearly understood human psychology in a sophisticated way, knowing exactly which emotional buttons to push to create trust and vulnerability. Over the next few months, Michael faced not only the financial consequences of the scam, but also the psychological trauma. He developed a deep distrust of online relationships and a general paranoia about his social interactions. Friends noticed that he had become more reserved and less willing to open up emotionally. The process of disputing the transactions with the bank was exactly as long and frustrating as anticipated. After 6 months of paperwork, phone calls, and documentation, Michael managed to recover approximately $3,000 of the $10,000 he had lost. A partial victory, but one that cost hundreds of hours of time and emotional energy. Michael also decided to share his experience publicly, writing about the scam on social media and travel forums. Initially, he hesitated because of the embarrassment and personal exposure it entailed, but he realized that his silence could mean that others would go through the same experience. The response to her story was surprising. Dozens of people contacted her sharing similar experiences, not just with Tinder scams, but with variations of the same basic scheme. Men and women of various ages and backgrounds had been targeted by criminals who used fake profiles to create emotional connections and then exploit that trust financially. Michael realized he had inadvertently become part of a community of survivors of a specific type of crime that combined traditional robbery with sophisticated psychological manipulation. This realization helped him process his own experience less personally and more as part of a larger criminal pattern. If you're thinking about traveling internationally and want to fully protect yourself against all types of scams tourists face, I highly recommend downloading the ebook Brazil Unlocked. It's a comprehensive guide that covers not only scams like the one that happened to Michael, but also dozens of other schemes criminals use to exploit tourists. The link is in the description and in the first pinned comment. Today, 2 years after the incident, Michael was finally able to take another international trip, this time to Europe with an organized tour group. He still feels the effects of the trauma of that night in Rio, but he's learned to manage the anxiety and paranoia he developed. The experience fundamentally changed the way Michael approaches relationships and social interactions, especially online. He developed a set of strict rules for himself about sharing personal information, meeting strangers, and situations that could leave him vulnerable. But perhaps the most significant change was his understanding of how modern criminals operate. Michael realized that today's scammers aren't just opportunists looking for easy targets. They're sophisticated amateur psychologists who study human behavior to exploit deep emotional needs. This is the most important lesson I want to leave you watching. Modern scams don't just exploit greed or financial naivety. They exploit our fundamental need for human connection, our loneliness, our dreams, and our hopes. Anyone can be a target, regardless of age, education, or life experience. So, how can you protect yourself? First, always be cautious about sharing personal information with people you've met online, especially on dating apps while traveling. Second, never accept changes in plans that take you to isolated or less safe locations. Third, always inform someone of your plans when meeting strangers. Most importantly, trust your instincts. If something seems strange or too good to be true, it probably is. Michael ignored several warning signs because he wanted to believe in the connection he thought he'd found with Isabella. Don't make the same mistake. Michael's story is a painful but important reminder that in our digital age, we need to be as careful with our emotional safety as we are with our physical safety. Today's criminals are masters at exploiting our humanity against us. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified when I post new videos about travel safety and real stories like this one. Also, leave a like on this video and tell me in the comments what you thought of Michael's story. Have you ever been in a similar situation or know someone who has? Michael's experience teaches us that traveling is one of the most enriching things we can do in life, but that we also need to be prepared for the risks that exist in the world. Knowledge is our best defense, and stories like this, though painful, can save others from going through the same situation. Remember, adventure and caution are not opposites. You can explore the world bravely and still be smart. Michael didn't let this terrifying experience stop him from continuing to travel. He simply learned to do so more safely. In the next video, I'll tell the story of a woman who was the target of a completely different scam in Barcelona, involving fake police officers and forged documents. It's an equally shocking story that shows how criminals can use perceived authority to exploit tourists. Don't miss it.